Hi everyone. Let's check if everything is working. Katya, do you hear the sound?
Not yet.
And can you please check it? Is it working? Yeah?
Yeah.
Great. So hello everyone. There are already 11 of us. Woo! Hope actually for like 300,000 or something. But anyway, probably some of you watched last Saturday a tour of Katya about Kremlin. And today we will be exploring the area just nearby Kremlin, which is the second oldest area of Moscow, called the Red Square. Probably have heard something about Red Square. You have seen it in some Hollywood movies with Arnold Schwarzenegger. And you probably remember it's a cold and unpleasant place where horrible things happen. And we'll tell you everything about it today. So, we'll be mainly walking today just around Red Square. The tour will be around 45-60 minutes, something like that. And in the end, if you have any questions that Katya won't answer to you in the chat, I will answer them to you here, live. And also, just below the video, there is a link for which you can leave us donations if you feel like doing so. We'll be glad to receive some. I think the maximum amount you can leave is 15,000 rubles, which is around like $250. Yeah, that's the average donation that we are waiting from you. Anyway, let's start. What we're standing in front of is one of the coolest hotels in the city center of Moscow called National. Let's imagine for a second that we are living there, that we feel today fancy. And why not to stay here? Because in the same hotel was staying Lenin and Nicholas II. Nicholas II is the last emperor of Russia and Lenin is the first communist leader of Russia. And they stayed here for no other reason than that it's just across the road from Kremlin and the Red Square. So we'll start like those famous leaders and walk to the Red Square to explore it. Let's just cross the road quickly. And here. Yes. So we're just across the road from the National Hotel. It's over there. Now it's still a very fancy hotels. If you come to Moscow, on the very bottom floor, on the first floor, you can go inside with a restaurant called Dr. Zhivago. And it's highly recommended to try Russian food there. They're actually awesome, especially famous for their breakfast. But anyway. And sometimes when with tourists we come to this area, they ask me, "Oh, that's it? That is a Red Square? That's what you wanted to show us?" But no, that's not the Red Square. That's something else. It's called the Manege Square. And it's just because one of the buildings, like, oh, over there, that long one. It's called the Manege. They trained horses there back in the days. But the Red Square is behind those red buildings. And you also may wonder, why on this map that I showed you, everything is so empty? And why those police officers? Right here. They're in those masks. And that's because the picture is made just recently, when confinement started, and no one is allowed to leave their homes, basically. Anyway, fortunately we can leave it through our virtual map. And usually we enter Red Square through those beautiful, wonderful gates, which unfortunately are the reconstructed version, but anyway, we'll talk about it later. While the military troops entering Red Square for the parade, and you probably have seen, or if you haven't, go to the YouTube and see the parade that happens on the Red Square every May 9th. So tanks and troops for that parade, they're entering from the right side of this beautiful red building, over here. They're following these yellow lines and go to the Red Square. But let's go the regular way. And let's jump not only geographically but also in time to the year of 2015. And you see it's pretty crowded here. And it's not even summer, you see people are in autumn coats. But anyway, let's come closer. That's our usual way how we usually take tourists to the Red Square. And we're already in. We passed through those wonderful gates. And again, as I have told you, it's all unfortunately a reconstruction. Because one of the worst Soviet leaders, and probably one of the worst leaders in the history of humanity, Joseph Stalin, decided not only to kill half of USSR, but also destroy those beautiful gates. The only reason being that he wanted his tanks and troops enter Red Square through this passage as well. But now the gates are reconstructed, and let's follow the crowd. So here we are right on a Red Square. Let me also show it to you from the air panorama. Oops. It's not the air panorama, but anyway, we'll use this one as well. Yeah, perfect. And the air panorama is here. So actually, that is the side from where you ended with Katya last Saturday, probably. But we'll move a little bit further to here. Yep, here it is. So again, Red Square is all empty. They're probably preparing something for a festival. And now they use Red Square for all different kinds of festivals, like book fairs. Let me open it. Like book fairs, car races, marathons, and of course, once in a year on May 9th, we're having here a military parade. Again, those yellow lines on Red Squares are all for tanks and troops coming here. And these kind of parades are happening here since May 9th of 1945, the Victory Day, which we celebrate every year since then, the victory over Nazi Germany. We don't celebrate a lot the victory in the whole World War II, but the victory in its European part is quite important for Russians until nowadays. And we entered through those gates. As I have told you, they were reconstructed, unfortunately. Just nearby them, there is this beautiful red building. And sometimes my tourists ask me, Nikita, is it Kremlin? And I tell them, no, it's not a Kremlin, it's just a historical museum. And indeed, it's a historical museum, made in what we call a fake Russian style. So what is the idea? Is that when they were constructing it back in the late 19th century, they wanted to make it be in like very truly Russian style. And they tried to imitate either traditional Russian churches in it, or some traditional wooden houses that peasants constructed for themselves. And usually those houses, they had windows, especially windows, very richly decorated with lots of tiny details. And they tried to replicate it here as well. But anyway, they finished the museum, and until nowadays, since late 19th century, it's a history museum. And it's actually the biggest history museum that we have in Russia, with more than 5 million items there. So actually, if you come to Moscow and you decide to go there and explore it, I would recommend you to have the whole day just for this history museum. Actually, I have been there, I think like 5 times, and I still haven't finished it. So it's pretty amazing and pretty giant. But let's get down to earth. Kate, is sound great? So here we are back on the ground, on our wonderful Yandex Maps, looking at the same history museum. And that is usually the frame that is in every person's picture. That guy is a little bit strange. He's taking a picture towards a wall, but I don't know. He's different. I think let's skip all of the beauty around us. Let's skip the towers of Kremlin. Let's skip this red mausoleum. Let's skip Goom and jump directly to the St. Basil's Cathedral, because I know you want to see Red Square for the St. Basil's Cathedral. Oops. Some gopniks on a porch. Yeah, here we are. That's the St. Basil's Cathedral. Probably the most iconic building of the whole of Russia. And probably whenever you see on BBC or New York Times news about Russia, if you don't see Putin, you see that. And that's indeed one of the most beautiful and most famous buildings of the country. Lots of other churches were inspired by it. And not a lot of them still look like this one. It is pretty unique. So first of all, what's unique? You see here, there are lots of towers. And each tower is actually a separate chapel. Which is a little bit strange. But anyway, that was actually a private church. So that's why. And a guy who used it, he was a Russian Tsar. His name was Ivan the Terrible. He was going to pray to a specific saint. And Russian Orthodox Christianity, you can call it like a little bit pagan religion. Because people go to church as they don't go just to pray to Jesus or to Virgin Mary or to the God in general. They actually go to the specific saint and they ask something from specifically him. So if you want, for example, your daughter, let's say, marry a good guy, you go to Saint Nicholas and you ask Saint Nicholas, please help me, make my daughter marry a good guy. Or if you want something else, you go to a specific saint and you ask it from him. So there is still like this pagan feel to it. But anyway, let's get back to the architecture of the cathedral. As I have told you, the cathedral was constructed by Ivan the Terrible. Let's speak a little bit about Ivan himself. You probably know him by such movies as Ivan the Terrible Changes Profession, for those of you who grew up in USSR, or by a picture, Ivan the Terrible killing his son. Let me show you. Here it is. Here is Ivan the Terrible. Doesn't he look terrible? But it's not a live photo, unfortunately. We have none. But it's a picture painted of him much later, in the 19th century, so 3 centuries after he lived. And here in this picture, he's killing his son. And nevertheless, he was actually a pretty terrible guy. We have no proof that he killed his son. But there is a version that he actually got one day a little bit angry at him, could inherit the throne. Only the males could be kings, no queens, just kings. And we call them, of course, Tsars. And by the way, speaking about Tsars, Ivan the Terrible was the first Tsar of Russia. All the guys before him, they were called Grand Princes. Because we had like lots of princes, in every city there was one, and then they kind of chose who will be the Grand Prince, kind of a little bit above them all. And then Ivan the Terrible was not only terrible, but also quite ambitious. And he said, I don't want to be just another Grand Prince. There are plenty of those before me. I want to be more. I want to be an emperor. I want to be Julius Caesar. And he actually made people call him Julius Caesar. But it's kind of hard for a Russian to pronounce such a long and not Russian name, especially for a peasant. So they kind of started to shorten it down, first to just Caesar, and then to Tsar. And here he is, Tsar. And after him, every other ruler was also called a Tsar. So back to his sons. One of his sons was killed by him. And he had 2 left. And actually, one of them was able to rule the country a little bit after Ivan the Terrible died. The only problem was that his son who ruled the country, he was a little bit stupid, to be honest. And he had some physical problems, so he was ill. And he ruled for just a couple of years and then just died because of one of those illnesses. And the next son was supposed to inherit the throne. The problem was that his third son, the only son left, was small. He was 6 years old. And then aristocracy was thinking, like, oh, sounds like a perfect opportunity to take power. Why don't we just kill him? And they actually did it. So what happened is they stole him, basically, and they sent him to the city of Uglich. It's like 200 kilometers from Moscow to like northeast from it. And there he sat, until one day he was found with a knife in his neck. And then aristocrats said, let's make the investigation. Someone killed him, but he was a person who was supposed to properly rule the country. Let's make an investigation. And the same aristocracy who wanted the power made the investigation. And guess what they found? It was an accident. The guy just fell on a knife a couple of times. It happens all the time with small children in prisons, right? So yeah, nothing suspicious. And after that they tried to choose who will rule the country after it. And they couldn't. And then became the time that which we call Time of Troubles. The Time of Troubles lasted for around 14 years. And the problem was that the country was really unstable. Actually, like part of the army was under control of one aristocratic family, the other part of the army under control of the other aristocratic family. And there was an economical crisis. There was also a giant famine at the time. Millions of people died, like literally around 3 million people died just because of hunger. And during the time, there started to appear people in Russia who called themselves the true successor of Ivan the Terrible. And do you have a picture of some of them? Let me first of all show you that son of Ivan the Terrible. By the way, yeah, here. So this guy, he was supposed to rule the country after the death of the second son of Ivan the Terrible, but he is the one who was killed. And that's an icon of him, because he was also named the saint after it. And what is interesting, by the way, about Russian icons is that they show multiple subjects on one icon. So here we have Dmitri, as he was called here. Here we have him being killed by a knife by one of the aristocratic guys. Here he's being brought to some monastery, probably. Here he's hanging out on the roof of some castle. And here he's also being killed a little bit more. And here he's being killed a little bit more. So a lot of killing. Anyway, so yeah, that's his picture. And let's get back to here. Yeah. So those people who call themselves princes of Russia, they, Kate, can you please check if everything goes on all right?
Yeah.
So those guys who were calling themselves princes of Russia, there were like 7 of them, but the fake Dmitri, as we call them, the fake Dmitri number 3 was the strongest. He actually got some support from the Polish guys, and with their help he was able to get to Kremlin, to right here, to go inside it through the main gates and rule the country. But when he got there, Polish guy said to him, "Okay, fake Dmitri, thanks for everything, thanks for leading us to the very Kremlin, now we rule the country." And they tried. They were actually the only guys who were able, historically, to rule Russia, while Russians couldn't. And you may wonder, Nikita, why are you telling us this long story when we're talking about the cathedral? And we're coming to it. You see this sculpture? Oops. You see this sculpture? Yep. That's a sculpture of guys who released Russia from those invaders, who released Russia from those Polish guys. And we call them citizen meaning, as it says here on the bottom in Russian. And fortunately, all of you know how to read old Russian language, so anyway, I'll translate it for you. So it says here, to the citizen meaning and the Prince Pozharsky, the grateful Russia in the summer of 1818. So the citizen meaning is this guy, the bronze Roman-looking hero, and Prince Pozharsky is this sitting guy, also Roman-looking hero. So first of all, citizen Lenin was actually a butcher, but he was a smart butcher, so he made a career. Eventually he became the head of the area where he lived, and he was friends with such guys as princes. And when those Polish guys were ruling the country, he said to one of his fellow princes, "Pozharsky, come, let's get rid of those Polish guys and rule the country ourselves." And Pozharsky said, "Yeah, okay." But it was a little bit hard for him, because you see he's sitting, and he has a hard time betting his as citizen minion. But anyway, those two... Is it good?
Let me check. Still loading. Now it's good.
Good?
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, some interruption in connection. No worries, we're back here. So anyway, the cathedral was constructed by Ivan the Terrible, and it was dedicated to this war with Kazan. It's now a city in Russia, before it was a separate country. And each chapel is dedicated to victory in one of the battles of that war. Originally, there was no cathedral here, of course, and each time Ivan the Terrible won in one of those little battles, he ordered to construct a chapel, a wooden one, dedicated to a particular saint, whose day was celebrated on the day of the victory in the battle. So eventually, he had 9 wooden chapels here. Let me show you from panorama view. Here, yeah. So we're looking on the St. Basil's Cathedral from above. You see, we have here 9 main domes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 4 smaller ones. So it all makes 9. And eventually, when Ivan the Terrible won the whole war, he ordered to reconstruct those wooden chapels to one stone cathedral. And you may ask me, Nikita, since you're so smart, why don't you tell us what colors are meaning? And unfortunately I can't, because there is no information about it at all. We don't know what colors meant, and probably they were just random. Sometimes colors mean something, like for example blue domes usually means the church is dedicated to Virgin Mary, silver ones means that the church is dedicated to Archangel, and usually they have gold ones, which can be basically anything, and colorful ones, just random, sorry. And you also may ask, what is this tiny one? You told us about 9 domes, and what is this number 10 one? So this number 10 is actually where Saint Basil is lying. Saint Basil was an actual historical figure. Let me tell you a little bit more about him. Let's get back to the map, to the ground. Here. Maybe we can see it better from here. Oops. Yes, like that. Yes, so here we are from the side, and you can see this little chapel is kind of attached to the whole cathedral. And that has an explanation. So, let's speak a little bit about, first of all, the name of the cathedral. We call it St. Basil's Cathedral. While it's actually a nickname, the original name is the Cathedral of Virgin Mary on a moat. And the moat was actually here. Let me show you a picture. Here we have a picture of old Moscow. Here we have the St. Basil's Cathedral. Here we have the Kremlin. And there we can see a bridge. And the bridge is over a moat. So, Cathedral of Virgin Mary on a moat. Logical, isn't it? Here we can see it a little bit better probably. Here again the bridge, the cathedral, and here is a moat. Pretty deep moat, by the way. Back to the map. Here we are. So, originally the cathedral was dedicated to the Virgin Mary. And Saint Basil, who was he? He was actually a really poor guy. He was usually hanging out somewhere in a Red Sqaure, like in this area. But it's a little bit young, relatively picture. Let's get here. Here, yeah. So he was usually hanging out in Red Sqaure. On Red Sqaure, they had a market. And market meant multiple things. First of all, you could find their food. Second of all, you can steal something there, and you can also beg for money there. And there was a special place on the Red Sqaure where people usually begged for money. It was right here, on the bridge. Usually here we're hanging out, first of all the beggars, and second of all the people who were robbing others, the robbers. And Saint Basil was usually doing first thing, he was begging for money. But except for begging, because it's not enough to become a saint, right? He was also predicting things, specifically fires. Fires usually happen in Moscow, and Moscow was at the time constructed mainly of wooden buildings, so a fire was kind of common thing, especially on the Red Sqaure where nothing was kept in a good condition, and those little stalls where merchants sold their items, they were always on fire, like every time. Actually, back in the days, people were calling Red Sqaure not a Red Sqaure, but a fire square, so it was that frequent. But anyway, Saint Basil, whom at the time they called just Basil, or in Russian Vasily, he predicted those fires. And we have no proof that he haven't started those fires himself after predicting them, but the important thing is that Ivan the Terrible, the Russian Tsar, believed that, yes, Vasily is predicting fires. And when he died, he said, I'm sure Vasily is a saint. He convinced Patriarch, because only Patriarch could decide such things, to name him a saint. He was named a saint, and according to the legend, Ivan the Terrible himself was carrying the coffin in which was lying the body of Saint Basil. And at first they buried him right here on the corner of the cathedral. There was no chapel there, which is called St. Basil's Chapel. There was just an empty area. Here was his grave. He was buried properly, like any proper Christian or saint. And only his son, Fyodor, decided to construct a chapel over it. And now this chapel is the only part of the cathedral where they have services happening every Sunday. Because in the rest of the cathedral, it's mainly a museum. And maybe we'll have another tour specifically about the St. Basil's Cathedral Museum. It's pretty big and there are lots of items there, so probably deserves a special, like, hour tour. So we won't concentrate on it now. Yeah, so now you know about the nickname. And people started for some reason calling the whole cathedral St. Basil's Cathedral. Well, now you know and can tell your friends, and here only this part, that's the Church of St. Basil. Let's get back to the Red Square. So, what else is on the Red Square? Walls and towers of Kremlin. Katya told you something about them probably last Saturday when you had a tour with her. Maybe I will repeat something, I'm not sure, but I'm definitely going to tell you something interesting about it. So first of all, the color. You look at the Kremlin and you may think, oh, it's obvious why they call Red Square red, because Kremlin is red. But no! Allow me to say you that you're wrong. Because Kremlin was white. Here, you can see it on this old picture. It's kind of like white-pink color, because Kremlin is built out of red brick. There was no stones around Moscow, but on the Moscow River itself, you could find plenty of clay. Plenty of clay, and make bricks out of it. So Kremlin is red bricks, but it was almost always painted in white paint, but they were not really keeping it well, so it was kind of pink-white color. Only in the late 17th century they started painting it in proper white color. Like on this picture, see it's more white tint. And only when Soviets came to power, only after 1917 Communist Revolution, and actually even after the death of Lenin in 1930s, in the beginning of 1930s, they started properly painting Kremlin in red and keeping it red color, the same that we have now. And now there are discussions whether we should keep Kremlin red, which is a symbol for communist power, or should we repaint it back to the white paint, which is more a symbol of imperial power. There are debates now, not really strong ones, but anyway, some debates. What do you think? Tell us your opinion in the chat section, actually. It would be interesting to know what a foreigner thinks. Should we keep it red, or should we repaint it back to white? But let's speak also about the towers of Kremlin. We have around 20 of them on the Kremlin, and some of them were for entering Kremlin. So this one, for example, it was the main tower to enter Kremlin. Here, this one was also a tower to enter, but not the main one. That one, in the distance, was also a tower to enter Kremlin. The others were just for protection. On tops of those towers, all of them, those that were for entrance and those who were just for protection, you have those fancy green roofs. And you may wonder, why would you need a fancy green roof on a fortress? And there is no explanation. So you don't need a fancy green roof on a fortress. And it was not built on top of Kremlin towers until it was stopped being used as a fortress. So in the late 17th century it happened. All of the towers are for protection, except for one, this tiny one. It is called Tsar's Tower. And according to the legend, we have no proof of that, but according to the legend, and legends are fun, so I'll tell you it anyway, Ivan the Terrible especially loved to sit there and look on the boxing matches happening in front of his eyes on the Red Square. Maybe it happened, maybe not, you never know. But let's speak a little bit more about specifically this tower, called Spaska. Why I want to speak about it? Because until very recent times, until the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991, it was used as the main entrance and exit to the Kremlin and exit from the Kremlin. And those gates, which are now closed, apparently it's Thursday, because Kremlin is closed on Thursday for tourists. Other days they are open and they can be used by tourists to exit the Kremlin Museum's area, which Katya showed you last Saturday. Anyway, so all of the Tsars and all of the important foreign guests and later Soviet leaders, they're using those specific gates to enter and exit Kremlin. Also, just above the gates there is an icon. Here is this one. Let me try to zoom in. Yeah. And that's an icon. No, it's too much. That's an icon of Jesus Christ. So the tower is called Spaska, which means the icon of Christ the Savior. And that's an icon of specifically Christ the Savior. They have this kind of icons on almost all of the towers which had gates to kind of protect the entrance from any evil guys who may enter the fortress. And yeah, when communists came to power, they said, we don't want icons anymore anywhere in the city. We actually don't want churches. We don't want any crosses. We don't any religious symbols at all anywhere. Because we want to have our own religion, basically, the communism. And they said to some workers, why don't you just cover those icons with bricks so it will just become a part of a wall and never be found? And workers said, yeah, of course. But then they thought, and what if God punishes me? And they decided to kind of suit both sides. They actually layered it with bricks, but they left a little bit of space between the bricks and the icon itself. So the icon was safe, and they also completed the order of Lenin. And only very recently, one tower in 2004 and others in 2010, when they were making restorations of them, they found that behind a wall there is a hollow space. And they started to investigate, and it appeared to be that the hollow space is actually a little thin layer of air between the bricks, the new bricks, the Soviet bricks, and the old icons. So they just cleared it, and here we have. So those are actual icons that were before in the Kremlin, and we have them nowadays as well. Let's go a little bit higher on this tower, and what we can see are the clocks. Those were not the first clocks that were in the Kremlin. Those are rather new. The original clocks were a little bit different and a little bit more interesting. Let me show you. No, that's too new. Oh, here. What was the main difference? Here we cannot see it on this picture, but I will tell you anyway. We had here not Roman numerals as we have now, so compared to that, here we have Roman numerals. On the original clocks, we had letters of Cyrillic alphabet, and letter A signified 1, letter B signified 2, letter C signified 3, and other things. And what was even more interesting, on regular clocks and on the modern clocks of Kremlin, you have hands of clocks which are moving, of course, and showing you the time. On the original clocks, it was opposite. The numbers themselves were moving, so this part, while clocks stayed still. Amazing, isn't it? But unfortunately they had to change them, and now we have what we have, still quite beautiful clocks. And what is also interesting about those clocks, they are the most precise clocks of the whole of the country. If you think your iPhone shows better time, or you think Google knows better time, you're wrong. And that's because they are connected with a wire to the Institute of Astrophysics on the Sparrow Hills area of Moscow, where they're synchronized with atomic clocks, and they are the most precise clocks of the whole country. When communists came to power, they changed a lot in Kremlin and its appearance. They changed its color, as I told you, but they also changed what's on top of the towers. Here we have those red stars, and let me show you them a little bit closer. Here's a guy cleaning them, so that's a quite new picture. First of all, you can get an idea about the size of those clocks. They're a little bit higher than a man, so they're around 3 meters high and 3 meters wide, and they're made out of ruby. It's not even red glass. They tried to make it out of red glass back in the days, but it didn't work. It kind of darkened with years because of the sun, so they changed it to ruby. But they're hollow inside also. They have inside lights, so those stars, they glow at night. And what's even crazier about them, they actually rotate because of the wind. Because otherwise they would just break, you see, the surface area of the star is quite big, so they would just break. So they made them rotating ruby, giant ruby stars on top of Kremlin towers. Do you want to have this kind of a stone in your earrings or something? You can try to steal it. And I don't think anyone actually tried to steal those red stars. They were just people who tried to steal golden crosses from the Kremlin churches, but we'll talk about it later. Let me show you also the first version of the stars. It was also very fancy. So here it is. That was all gilded. So it was all really thin leaves of gold on top of some other metal. Those parts, the black parts, were red glass. And hammer and the sickle, the symbol of the Soviet Union, was made out of precious stones. And you may think, yeah, it's quite expensive for the stars that you cannot even see properly. It's on top of the tower. And Soviets thought as well. So they only put them there in 1930s because before they just had not enough money for it. And they made not one of them, but 5. My God, 5 precious stones, gold, and ruby glass. That's crazy! And that's specifically in the time when people were actually starving and it wasn't that great. But let's continue about Red Square. Let's move a little bit further. We spent too much time in one spot. Let's come to the Mausoleum. Here it is. That red thing in front of the Kremlin, actually I think I have a better picture of it. So, here, yeah. This red thing in front of the Kremlin, that is called Mausoleum. In front of it we have the regular security guy, and we have this writing in Russian, which says A-E-H-N-H. In Russian language it would be Lenin. And guess who is inside? It's Lenin. He's actually buried there. Probably by Christian tradition, he's a little bit underground, so when you enter, you actually take some stairs and go a little bit below the ground level, and there it is. Unfortunately, I cannot show you the pictures of a dead body. Nevertheless, I'm pretty sure you want to see them, but they don't allow to take pictures inside, and the guards there, they're how do you describe it? They're tough. I think they trained in KGB or something, because the look in their eyes is like, I don't want to see it another time. Anyway, so that's not the first mausoleum of Lenin. There were others. Let me show you the first one because it's all very, very interesting. Wait a sec. Here it is. So that is the first mausoleum. Lenin died in 1924. And they asked one of the main architects of Moscow of the time, Shushev, to make a mausoleum. And not just make a mausoleum, but make it in 3 days. So the same day when Shushev was ordered that, he moved to Kremlin and started working immediately. And you cannot do a lot in 3 days because he had to make a project, but also construct the project. So yeah, I don't know any other architectural piece that was built that fast. So it's a box. Shushev thought of a box. Here is a box. Inside of the box was Lenin, and it says here Lenin, and here was a guard. And since the day of Lenin's death until 1970s, there were guards standing nearby his tomb on the sides, here and here. The tomb was changed, but the guards stayed. And only in the 70s they moved the guards to the Eternal Flames monument to the World War II and people who died in it. But before it was nearby Lenin's tomb. That was the first version of the mausoleum. You see how many flowers? Anyway, the next version was looking like that. It was wooden, What they added also is that on the top there was kind of a little stage on which were usually staying either high government people or some important guys, depending on a particular event, and they stayed there, usually just waving to the parades coming by them on the Red Square and giving speeches, for example. So that was the wooden mausoleum, and a little bit later, they also rebuilt it in 1930s in stone. Actually, it's the same ones that we can see nowadays. Here, this one. So here on the top were standing all the Soviet leaders and important guys. They could also stand on the sides. So it's kind of strange. So it's like a stage, but also a tomb. Not sure I get it. There was also another person who was buried with Lenin inside of the mausoleum. And that was none other than Joseph Stalin. And here I have the picture where it says on the front not only Lenin, as on the top, but also on the bottom Stalin. And they actually were buried there, laying there together until 1961, when finally Khrushchev, the Cold War guy, maybe you have heard something of him, he decided that we don't want it anymore, we don't want to follow Stalin, we don't want him being our main, let's call him God, and let's just bury him properly behind the mausoleum and just keep Lenin as our main saint. And they did that. And they not only did that, but they did it on Halloween night! Why? Actually, I don't know why they decided to make it specifically on the Halloween night, but they disguised it. Actually, they made it at night, but also they decided to make a rehearsal of the parade. One of the parades that happened in Soviet time, and still actually until nowadays it happens. It's a parade of November 7th. It's dedicated to the first parade happened during the war, after which soldiers were going directly to the battles with Nazis, and since then it's repeated every year. So anyway, Halloween is October 31st, and soldiers were rehearsing the parade, and it was kind of noisy, too many people, and 7 soldiers out of thousands were asked to help with the body of Stalin. And when everyone was kind of paying attention to the parade rehearsal, they quietly took Stalin's body out of the mausoleum and reburied him properly behind the mausoleum. So quite funny that they chose the Halloween night. By the way, here in this picture we have on the top standing Yuri Gagarin, the first man in space. And here are the people celebrating him going to space and returning successfully back. Let's get back to our map. So we talked about the mausoleum, we talked about the tower, about St. Basil's. Let's move a little bit closer back to the History Museum. Here we are. By the way, if you are coming to Moscow, and you are coming to Moscow, if you haven't been here yet, and if you have been, you come here second time or third time or whatever, when you go to the mausoleum, and I'm pretty sure you want to see a dead body of Lenin, you have to come here. So those metal detectors, that's the actual entrance, and then you go along the wall of Kremlin, and along the wall of Kremlin you walk not just for nothing, but because it's a giant graveyard. There are more than 300 people buried along the Kremlin wall, some of the main generals, some of the astronauts, some of the journalists, some of the writers, just any guys who were important for the history of the Soviet Union. And on the wall, you will see placards with their names. Also, where we have those trees, the green, blue tint pine trees, that is actually a brother, group grave of people who died during the first years of the revolution fighting with Imperial Army, the White Army. So they're also buried there. So it's like a giant cemetery in the main square of the country, which is a little bit ridiculous. So there are also talks not only about repainting Kremlin, but also about getting rid of the graveyard on our main square. But anyway. Actually, what do you think? Should we rebury Lenin or should we keep him? Also, tell us your opinion in the chat. And, oops, sorry. Let's move back to here. Here we have another tower of Kremlin. We won't be talking about it a lot, but just a few words. It's called Nikolsky. It's also was one of the towers to enter Kremlin. It has also an icon above the entrance. It's icon of St. Nicholas. And the previous tower, all of the towers of Kremlin actually suffered during two main wars that Russia faced. Actually, one war and one revolution. The war with Napoleon, which made this tower look... Let me show you how. Like that. So, no top part, no like decorations, everything is pretty bad conditions. This drawing was made just a couple of months after Napoleon exited Moscow and went back to France to continue killing people. And actually it's one of the very few drawings made of Moscow of that period, so we are lucky to have it. And for example, the previous towers that I showed, the Spassky, the main tower, it looked like that. But not, of course, after Napoleonic Wars, there was no photography at the time, but after the Communist Revolution. So communists were not that great. If you have any romantic perception of them, they were pretty tough with cultural or architectural heritage of Moscow and Russia, and also with people's lives. But anyway, so that's how it looked like. Everything is destroyed. Icon is already half destroyed. There were some chapels here on the sides of the towers. Of course, were destroyed later. The entrance to the Kremlin itself is also in awful condition, so you see. So, back to the map. The History Museum, I told you already something. Let's move to here. I will show you what destroyed also our favorite Soviet leader, Joseph Stalin. And he actually destroyed not only those gates, as I told you, for the parade, for the tanks to go here. Also, he destroyed this beautiful little church, which was actually rebuilt a lot of times before. Let me show you a couple of pictures of it. Sorry, it takes a little bit long. Here it is. Here we have the old picture. So here's the old version of the church. It was originally looking more like the ones that we have now, but it was restored to that look that we have now. So this one, just a couple of years before it was destroyed, so it was rather stupid. They started big restoration process. They rebuilt it to the original version, and then Stalin said, don't like it. And there's actually versions that he wanted to make here public toilets for a department store, and that was a reason to get rid of it. Anyway, so he did that. There was no church, and that's a reconstructed version from the 90s. The gates are also reconstructed in the 90s. And also on this old picture, we can see not only the old version of the church, not only those gates painted in white, but also this one. That was a building that was before on the place of a history museum. So on place of that. And it had multiple purposes. At first, it was a pharmacy, and it was a pretty fun pharmacy. So in Russia, they couldn't produce for a long time any kinds of medicaments, so everything was imported from England, for example, a lot. And what was strange, in the pharmacy is they sold two things: medicaments and alcohol. Because medicaments are good, but as people believed back in the days in Russia, what's the use of medicaments if you don't eat them with a glass of wine or beer? So it was kind of compulsory to buy a bottle of wine or beer when you're buying pills. I wonder what modern doctors would say about it, but anyway. Later it became, how do you call it, like a place from which governed different parts of the country. It was called Zemstva, and then it became a restaurant, and then they made it a university, Moscow State University, and then they made it into what we have now, the History Museum. And we're actually coming to the end soon. We're already 50 minutes walking through the Red Square. But there is one other thing that I want to show you. It's called GUM. Oops, sorry. It's called GUM. This giant, beautiful beige thing. GUM is a department store. The thing is that Red Square originally was mainly used as a market. And as I've showed you on the old pictures, let's get back to them quickly. Like here, it was a market, so people are selling like here different fruits, different vegetables. They were selling mainly also fish, honey, lots of fur, some weapons. Basically anything you can imagine was traded on the Red Square. The problem was that there were fires happening on it all the time, as I told you, and one of the Russian rulers, actually the one who constructed the Kremlin that we see now, Ivan III, it's not Ivan the Terrible, it's Ivan III, he said, "Get rid of the market! I don't want to be a market nearby Kremlin walls! I'm afraid of fires." And he was actually right, there were fires. So they moved the market a little bit from the Kremlin walls, and they usually had it where we have now this GUM building. But the GUM building is rather new. It's from the 1890s, 1893 to be precise. That's when they made it. And they made it as trading rows, as they called it. And there they were selling all the different things. Fortunately, we have pictures, so let me show you. So that's a picture actually from the 1930s, but anyway, let's look at it better. They were selling here all the same things that they sold before on the Red Square. So food, clothing, weapons, and instruments, basically whatever you can imagine. And then originally the market looked a little bit differently. It was not as beautiful, not as fancy. So it looked like that in a more classical style. And inside it was basically a mess. And it was not taken care of a lot. So inside it looked like that. It's a picture taken just a couple of years before it was deconstructed. So it was a little bit dirty and has also multiple floors. And no one wanted to repair it, as I told you. And then one day, a woman went there and she decided just to try one of the dresses. And when she was trying a dress, she fell through the floor of this shopping mall. And that was kind of the last drop in a cup, and the head of Moscow said, "We cannot live like that anymore, let's close the shopping mall and let's rebuild it." And he actually made merchants who were trading there pay for that. And yeah, with their money, they rebuilt the thing. And since then, until nowadays, it is like the main shopping mall of the whole of Moscow. During Soviet time, it was always very crowded. And that's because here you could at least find something, like some type of clothes, like for example, coats or jackets or boots or trousers. And in other smaller cities, not in Moscow, sometimes you couldn't find anything. So people from all over USSR were coming to here. They're standing in large queues to get at least something. But there was a secret part of GUM, and let me show you that. So here is GUM. Let's enter it, by the way, see how it looks like now. Now it's all fancy and bright, lots of beautiful lights, lots of decorations, some security guards, and lots of window shopping happening here. Not a lot of actual shopping, it's kinda too expensive, and actually it's more like an exhibition, let's say, because for shopping they have other luxury shopping malls. But here at this end, yeah, like that. Just one second. Yes, here, specifically in this area where we are standing now, that was a secret section of GUM, which actually started around this area, but on the first floor. Here. Yes, so here on this map from here to here, it was a secret section of GUM called Section 200. And in the Section 200 you could find the same goods as in the rest of GUM, so all Soviet produced things, but without any line. And you may wonder how they achieved that. How they made GUM without a line when everywhere else in GUM they have lines. It's easy. You just make it accessible only to the government. Perfect. It's an equal country with equal rights for everyone and equal opportunities. Here you have it. Equal goods, but without any lines. And it was accessible only by the government, as I told you. Also, it was shown to foreign guests to show how good it is to live in the Soviet Union. And that's actually during the time when parts of the GUM were used as a communal apartments where people haven't had a shower, a toilet, or a kitchen, and they had to live there in quite horrible conditions, just 3 floors above the section 200, because there was no housing in Moscow. But of course, to the foreign guests, you show the best and you show the section 200. Sometimes, if you made some crazy achievement, they would allow you to. The first man in space, he was allowed to visit section 200 once, because he was in space once. Wonderful, isn't it? So, yeah, that's how GUM looks now. Not as crowded as before, because now we have other shopping malls, but still it's the most famous shopping mall. And I think we actually have finished with our exploration of the Red Square. Let's exit the beautiful GUM. And yeah, here it is. I think that's it. The hour has passed. Katya, have you have any questions? Do we have any questions?
No, but we want to say thanks to Jennifer, who gave us a great donation.
Thanks, Jennifer.
Yeah. Let's people join our next tour.
Yeah, so of course, next Saturday we'll have another tour, and I think it will be a tour actually of the city center of St. Petersburg. If you didn't like my tour, because it was too hectic or whatever, next Saturday it will be Katya who will be showing you the city center of St. Petersburg. It will be again like 45-60 minute tour, quite a quick one. And as on this one you can leave as donations, on the next one you can also leave as donations. It's quite important for us during the confinement period. But yeah, I think that's it, right? For some time we'll still have this tour available on YouTube, so if you missed any parts you can still watch it. But we're not sure if we will keep it. Maybe we'll delete it. We'll see. Anyway, bye. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel, because this way you will get notifications about our next videos. And yeah, see you next Saturday.